Good evening. Welcome to the Milton Town Meeting, April 13th, 2026 meeting. I'd like to call us to order. Karen, can you do a roll call?
Yes, we have Jay Fundling, Elaine Craighead, James Lee Dassey, Lorraine D., Larry Johnson, Brian McGuire, Ronald Thea, Nicholas Tangney, and Cecile Yang. You have a quorum.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm dressed a little bit differently than normal tonight because just in the past hour, I filmed the pre-town meeting show with our moderator, where we go over all the things that, help town meeting members get prepped. So I encourage anyone watching this, or you can all encourage your town meeting friends, especially newly elected town meeting friends, to watch the show and get ready for town meeting. So what are we doing today? So today we are about 2 to 3 weeks away from town meeting. Why I wanted to thank you for joining me tonight. What I wanted to do tonight is sort of do a beta test, a dry run of some things that I want to present at town meeting. I sent you all an email yesterday and a slew of attachments. You're totally forgiven if you didn't look at any of them. But this is the sort of thing I'd like to present at town meeting, specifically looking at not only where is the budget this year, but where is the budget going? Where do we see it going, and what should we be doing about it? I appreciate you joining me tonight. I wanted you to join me for a couple reasons. One is if I'm sharing something in your name, I want you to at least know about it, if not okay it. If I'm going to be saying, for example, I'm going to be talking about forecasts. Forecasts depend on assumptions. If I'm saying this is our forecast, I'd like the warrant committee to at least know what assumptions went into that forecast and preferably even give me feedback and say, do you like it? Do you not? I also want feedback for the presentation. You'll see, I mean, you saw if you looked at it yesterday or today, I sent you a more refined version of the presentation about an hour ago, but it's not refined. It's not final. We've got 3 weeks to finalize it. I want feedback to how to make it better. Uh, I certainly could use the help on that. What else is saying? Yeah, let's talk about assumptions. When we're thinking about the assumptions that go into the forecast, I do want to keep in mind we want the assumptions to be what we think things will be, not what we wish them to be. There's certainly several assumptions that I wish were different than what I'm showing here, but it what I'm showing I think is the best we have for the best forecast of what's coming in the future. And we should talk about, what we present. Should we, I mean, you'll see this will become obvious as we go through what we're seeing. There are going to be a few options that the town will have to make. Do we want to make recommendations? Do we want to just share the numbers? Any questions or thoughts before I jump into what I've prepared? Okay. I will share my screen. Sharing is not turned on. It's okay. Should have tried that out earlier. Karen, I don't know if you got the sharing request.
I haven't. Sean, are you? I used to have this ability too. Sean, are you there?
Yeah, you're good. It's some weird Zoom permissions thing.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm sharing now. And I said this presentation is not polished. You can tell that by the first title slide. It's not polished. I'll be working on polishing in the next couple weeks. I will be open to help from any of you. I already got help from Nikki helped me out yesterday. I did not implement all of her help, all of her changes. I apologize, but she's already helping me make it better. So one thing I want to talk about when it comes to the budget is how we got here. This is something that we've already discussed in the past that, especially in January when it looked like we were having, budget crisis that then now is better. But, why are we at a place where 1 year out from an override, the school budget was underfunded by $1 million and is having layoffs? Long story short is there was a forecast that was used to look at the override last year that had some assumptions that were too low. Getting into, and I guess I would also request for all of you warrant committee members watching this, I'd like you to take on two roles tonight. One is be yourself. You know a lot of the background, you know a lot of what's going on. What do you think of what I'm saying? But also have part of your brain be the average town meeting member who doesn't know everything that's going on. And, am I explaining things well? What do we need to explain so that they understand what's going on? So one fundamental fact of our budget is expenses grow faster than revenue. Revenue, we can increase current people's property taxes by 2.5%. We also get to add to that new growth, meaning new buildings built, new renovations done on buildings. That ends up being about 3%, a little more than 3% per year that our tax base grows. But our expenses grow. I mean, their union negotiated salaries and their health insurance as large drivers. Those grow by more than 3%. What I'm showing here is calling it ongoing revenue expenses. I'm excluding one-time funds and one-time expenses. Those are in another bucket. We can look at those later, but I'm just looking at the ongoing expenses and revenue. I'll get in a minute to the assumptions that underlie this, especially the change in expenses. You might wonder if these are just assumed expenses in the future, why does the percent change vary from year to year? And that's because, for one thing, some bond payments are going to be coming online. And for another thing, in FY30, the schools, as the people on the warrant committee know, the schools are setting aside money in their circuit breaker account. In FY30, they will no longer be doing that. And so I've incorporated that into here. But either way you look at it, our expenses are rising faster than our revenue. And this next slide gets to the similar idea. We have a shortfall going up, and the shortfall. One reason I like this slide is because it shows the shortfall going up like in a stair-step fashion. So when we're talking about ways to address it, I want to keep this in mind that our shortfall goes up in a stair-step. So any solution we have to this problem, if we can make that look like a stair-step, that's also good. I will say that we have an operating budget stabilization fund in this town that we set up with the last override. And the whole point of that is to help us get from override to override without taking too much of a hit to the services provided. So I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but these numbers are shown before we use that fund. So here we
Jay,
go.
quick
Yeah, please.
question.
Please.
Yeah, in slide 4, is that percentage on the y-axis of your graph?
Good question. Who's talking? Cecile?
Cecile, yeah.
Slide 4. That is dollars. That is millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Good question. Thank you. So we have an operating budget stabilization fund. It's something that was established with the override. Last year at town meeting, we put $2 million in free cash in there, and the override provides another $700,000 per year, growing a bit, growing with 2.5%. This year, at town meeting this year, we're going to put an additional $1 million in free cash. And I will say that the forecasts we see going forward throughout this presentation are going to assume no more free cash contributions are put into here. Now that's an assumption. We certainly might have free cash in future years to put into here, but that's what these numbers are going to look at. So, all right, we have this operating budget stabilization fund, but now we really need rules about how we use it. For this year, the way we're using it is more or less, we're taking the $700,000 in tax revenue that's going into this in FY26, and we're using that in FY27. That's fine for 1 year. We really should have a more well planned out idea of how we're going to use the entire operating budget stabilization fund, including the $2 million in free cash from last year, including the $1 million in free cash from this year. How are we going to use it? And then to plan how we're going to use this. Like, for example, I said we have $3 million in cash here. How are we going to pay that out? Well, we need to know what our target is. Are we paying that over 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? We need to have some idea of when the next override is going to be so that we can plan for how to spend down the operating budget stabilization fund. I will say One plan is to pay out in a stair step. I'm hearkening back to that stair step uh, graph we saw before. One way is to say, okay, we've got a certain amount in there. We've got 700,000 going in there every year. We've got 2 million plus 1 million in there. If we spend it down in this way through FY30, then we'll go down to zero. So that's one plan, is withdraw a larger amount, larger dollar amount every year to try to bridge that gap. Now I'm saying we should have a plan for how we use the operating budget stabilization fund. I think this last point is important. It needs to be flexible. I don't think we can or should have a plan that says this is the dollar amount we will pull out from this fund and it's set in stone. But right now we don't have anything. Right now, if you asked me or one of the select board or perhaps even the town administrator and said how much we're going to use next year, I think the answer would be, I don't know. And I don't think that's a great idea. I think we should have a target for how much we're going to use from this fund next year and the year after. And then we'll see if reality brings us away from that target. So this is the same point. We're going to need a policy. We can propose a policy. And I emailed all of you. I think I emailed you a proposed policy. I can propose a policy. It's really going to have the most teeth if the select board approves a policy rather than winging it. Now, one part of the policy, as I said, is what is the target year? When do we think we're going to need this to last us to the next override? I think the select board can adopt a policy and put off selecting a target year for a few months if they want to, but they really need to do both pretty soon, as much as possible.
Hey, Jay.
Yes.
It's Ron. I have a question. You may get to it in your later slides, since I see you have 32 of them. But
most of them are appendices.
okay. Hey, I think this is super helpful. I do wonder, as a citizen, what is a school board's position on how would they propose to control the cost? I know we want level service, but given the realities of cost way outpacing revenues, and the fact that we don't want to do overrides every couple of years, and these stabilization funds, I don't think that they're able to fix this permanently, maybe for a couple rounds, right?
Okay.
Eventually that stabilization fund goes away. I would love to hear what the school board has to say. And I don't want to hear it for the first time at town meeting. I would expect that the school board sits down with the select board and this warrant committee, and the three bodies come up with a plan, as opposed to we get there and we're all like, not sure who's doing what. And I don't know if it needs to happen for this town meeting, but at some point, I think our three bodies need to sit down and think holistically. How can the schools contain costs? And maybe that means they need to cut services somewhere. Maybe they need to make some tough calls. And then they should do as much as they can. Then the select board, I would think, should propose what they think is a way to, allocate the budget. And then I would think our job is to think about the use of emergency funds. That's how I think, as a citizen, I would expect these three organizations to tackle this. So it's not just warrant committee proposing something, and who knows if the select board will agree or not. And that's just my thoughts.
No, that's I'll tackle that last point first. I mean, I'm saying, there's the policy, let's have a written policy on the stabilization fund, and then that we've got to have a target year. I think for the target year, I think that for both of those, we as the warrant committee can just say, here's what we think. And maybe we should. Maybe we should just say, here's what we think for the policy. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of argument about the policy. I've talked to Mr. Milano. We're sort of in agreement. There's not much disagreement as to how to pay things out. The question is what year you aim for. That's one of my questions.
I think the policy does make sense in general, right? There should be some understanding that the town meeting sets forth for us on when would we tap into these funds. So it's not just on a given year we decide, or the select board asks for it. and we don't have any guidance. So I think the policy makes sense.
Yeah. But one question is, does the warrant committee just declare this is the policy and so shall it be? Do we ask the select board to approve it? If we ask the select board to approve it and they drag their feet, what do we do? That didn't get to your question about cost containment by the schools. I mean, as we go through this, we'll see there's a couple scenarios that have the schools needing to contain costs. I'm not talking about how they'll contain costs. They've said, we only got one lever, and that's people. So,
Yeah,
I know I'm not answering that question.
yeah, I don't know the answer. I'd welcome the thoughts from the rest of the warrant committee, but are we thinking that we would decide on the policy for this upcoming town meeting and just throw it out there in front of town meeting, or would we hope to put it together and then I don't know if it becomes part of a warrant or something? Like, I don't know how town meeting hears about something like this because it's not a law. It would just be an
Yeah.
internal policy, I guess, unless we said the policy goes into law and that goes into the definition of these reserve funds. I guess we could put it in law, or we can just say this is a guiding principle or guiding policy that we will use, but it's not law, right?
Yeah, what I was thinking of doing was putting together the policy, putting forward the policy. And I guess now that I think about it, nobody could see these slides and come away saying, "Oh, I totally understand what the policy is." But putting forth the policy and twisting the select board's arm to adopt it, and twisting the select board's arm to pick a year for an override. I don't know if that's answering your question.
It does for the policy. How we get something agreed to. My broader question is just, I would think that there should be some more discussions on the planning, and maybe that's something we need to sit down with Nick to figure out how do we get, get the school board working with the select board and us. Or not, I guess. Maybe we just sit
Yeah,
here.
I'm not sure. Brian, your hand has been up for a little while.
Yeah. My thought is, I think it's good to, give some illumination to the town meeting members what we want to do, but like, I would want so just so people know, Jay and I are on this, Milton Budget Committee. That's not the right name of it, but it's basically trying to come up with policies on the budget. And I don't know if they've seen this, but I would want to make sure that they sign off on, like, so the select board people on it, there's planning board people on it, there's school committee people on it, and warrant committee people on it. And I would want to make sure that, so there is a group, Ron, but I would want to make sure that they've signed off on this, which I don't think they have. I don't know when we're meeting again, but right, you would agree with that, Jay?
Well, here's my thoughts, and I know I'm being recorded. I sent an earlier version of the proposed policy and an early version of the forecast to that whole group in early February, and I've heard very little back. So I'll just say I'm getting a little. We seem to have a problem of who's going to act and do something. I've heard positive noises from people regarding all this, but everybody's looking at everybody else and wondering, okay, who's going to do something?
Yeah.
So this is me, and this is the warrant committee doing something.
Well, and I also wonder, and I think that they had some hesitation about it at the last meeting because I know it came up. But the biggest question is, what do you project for increased expenses over the future years?
Sure.
And that's the challenge. And I don't know that people wanted to bake in a 5% increase or have it out there because it might not be. It might be better. We might get cost savings. Things might change.
Yeah, that's
And they
true.
have been lower before, so.
Yeah, that goes back to when I was saying assumptions, what we think things will be, not what we hope them to be. And I guess it's level service cost increase. So if level service, let's say for the schools, let's say level service is 5%, but they can get by with 4% if they, you know, reduce some people's hours and cut expenses here and there. That doesn't change the fact that level service is 5%, even if they might limp by with 4%. So that means
Well, I'm not sure level service is only like I can talk about, want to talk about this after this presentation, but I'll do it now if you want. But level service, the 5% is like a post-COVID number, but it wasn't a pre-COVID number. And the pre-COVID number was somewhere in the 3% range.
Well-
And well, for Milton, it was higher. For Milton, it was 4.2% pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it's been much higher. And it's, you know, and it's, and if things change and we get back to pre-inflationary economies, that should change also, right?
Well, here's my thought is that the school administration provided that committee, the Joint Budget Committee, with a detailed multi-year financial forecast. And that was one of the, 8 files I sent everybody yesterday. So I apologize, but you have it in your email. And that's pretty detailed. And that shows how they came up with those numbers. Now, there might be some assumptions baked into those that are conservative, but the experts on that topic gave us their level service numbers. We have not received those from the town. So I would find it hard to say the school administration gave us detailed numbers showing what they expect their cost to increase year over year, but I'm going to put in something else.
Well, they have like close to 5%, correct?
Correct.
For teacher salaries, correct?
I don't remember the details.
The actual 10-year average for increase in teacher salaries in Milton is 2.5%. In post-COVID, it's been 4%, 4.1%, excuse me. So
Yeah.
I do challenge the numbers if you wanted to look at what they actually are. So I think that's one of my struggles. And I don't know, I sent out
Yeah.
an email to the budget committee about this, and I know they were digging into it, but I haven't seen anything on it. But
Yeah, I do have some caveats later in this presentation. One of them in particular might get to what you're talking about. But yeah, can we put a pin in the? I knew this was going to be a point of discussion, as it should be. Can we put that on hold for a minute?
sure.
Okay, thank you. Nick Tagney, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, but I'm good for right now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So moving ahead. Okay, we're going to start looking at forecasts. What do these forecasts not include? Nick Tagney, I think I'm reading your mind. They don't include, there's an Atherton Fire Station debt exclusion that may be voted on fall of this year or next year. I'll have some idea of what that would impact on the tax levy. Not a promise, but just a ballpark. There's going to be a new school, which may be voted on as soon as 2028. Don't know what it's going to cost. Don't know what will affect the tax levy, but we'll be able to put some ballpark estimate in there. And the new school of operating expenses. Maybe it's up and running in FY32. We've heard a ballpark of $1.5 million in additional operating expenses. Again, just a ballpark. None of that is included in these forecasts that we're looking at. And also, as I said, I'm not including one-time revenue and expenses. So one of the forecasts that I'm looking at, I'm calling the baseline. It's going through FY 2030. And here are some of the assumptions that are going to be largely true for a lot of these. New growth of $1 million, state aid, I have an assumption in there, health insurance, I'm assuming 8% growth year over year. That's a little high, but that's what it was this year. I don't have any basis to make any other assumption. I mean, I used to be an employee benefits actuary. Forecasting health insurance inflation is witchcraft, but got to assume something. I think this is a little on the high side, but we're only talking about forecasting a small number of years, so this might be prudent. It's what it was this year. Those are items not under our control, and they're going to be the same through all these forecasts. items that are under control, school budget. As Brian said, we were provided this by the school administration. It's in the ballpark of 5.2% a year, except in that 1 year when they stop, when they filled up their circuit breaker account and don't have to contribute to it anymore. They've given us a detailed forecast. Town salaries, I haven't gotten anything official from the town administrator, but he said that it would be around 3.5 to 4% per year. So I'm assuming 3.5% per year. And then because I don't have a very good flair for the pneumatic, I'm going to jump ahead and talk about what I see for the results. I'm going to talk about it now and then talk about it, circle back and have the same slide later after we see some details. If we look at an override year of 2030, one thing is, if we do that, what would the override amount, what would the override amount be in 2030 when we need an override? I didn't even bother calculating it. Because if we don't have an override until 2030, we've got catastrophic budget shortfalls between now and then. It doesn't seem plausible for the town under any assumptions I'm looking at. So let's say we're looking at override year of 2029. Maybe I should switch these two columns because, first I'd like to say, what do we have if we have an override year of 2029? Then we have significant budget shortfalls for 2 years. And then we could come back up to the level service starting at FY29. I'll get to this in a few minutes, but when I say come back to level service, I mean in FY29, get back to what level service would have been if you take the level service now, increasing it with what it should have been increased with over those few years, and get back to this level service we have now. In that case, we're looking at in 2029, we'd be asking the voters for a $14.5 million override if we want that to last for 5 years, or a $13 million override if we want it to last for 4 years. Another option is an override in 2028. That seems a little soon. That's 2 years from now. Well, I shouldn't give a value judgment, but I will say that's 2 years from now. In that case, we'd get to have a fully funded level service budget every year. We wouldn't have to reduce level service. And then we'd be looking at override, again, 2 years from today, $9.5 million, we want it to last for 4 years. $11.5 million, we want it to last for 5 years. I'll give more details behind this, but this is sort of setting the roadmap of what we're going to be looking at.
Hey, Jay, just for feedback on this, as you put these numbers together, so in like the 2029 significant budget shortfalls for 2 years. So you're talking about the 2028 year and the 2029 year? Because the budget we're doing now is for fiscal 27, right?
You're right. And then, so this should
because it
say
says like
FY30. Yeah. If the
I think
vote
you
is in the spring of 2029.
Yeah, I think you just want to kind of add that level of detail in here somehow because it would look, reading this chart, it looks like in 2028 you're going to have a level service year, but we know that'll be down probably from where you are today. And so you're talking about what you should define what those 2 years are.
Okay, thank you.
I think.
Thanks. Yeah, and I had it wrong. I had this as FY29. Okay. I hope this all comes together eventually, but certainly the order I'm presenting it matters, and so feedback is good. I'd like to take a look. So going on what I'm calling the baseline forecast, going through FY30. And I'm looking at ongoing expenses. I'm just looking at those expenses that we said, 5.2% for schools and 3.75 for town salary increases. So then we face a deficit in 28, 29, 30, deficit of $2.5 million, $4.5 million, $6.5 million, total shortfall of almost $14 million. How do I put this in terms that I can get my head around? Very much a ballpark. I'm sure the town administrator would have more precise numbers for me, but ballpark. Let's say an employee's pay and benefits cost $100,000. If we're $2.5 million short, that's 25 employees or their financial equivalent that we're short. FY30, we're $6.4 million short. That's 64 employees that we're short. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time gaming this scenario and tweaking the assumptions to see what we could get. It doesn't seem like one where the town could provide the residents of the town with the expected services. Okay, so what if we move that in a little bit instead of aiming for an override in 2030, aiming for an override in 2029? So now a lot of the major assumptions are still the same. I am assuming no additional contributions to the operating budget stabilization fund. If we have free cash that we can put into there, that'll ease things a bit. And then I took the school budget and the town department budget below what they wanted them to be by the same percentage. Schools want 5.2%. I knocked 1.7% off of that. I said you're going to get 3.5%. The town wants their pay increases to be 3.75%. I took the same 1.7% off that, said you're getting 2%. Now, any sort of union contract is not going to let us have town-wide, town department budget and pay increases by 2%. But this is what I'm fiddling with to make it work. And we're using the operating budget stabilization fund through FY29. So yeah, we're using that up. The override would be 3 years from today, 4 years from the last override. Where does that put us? Again, this is a place where I hope to have prettier slides by the time we get to town meeting, but it's got the information here. We've got revenue on the top line. Then we use the operating budget stabilization fund in that stair step. $800,000 this year, which is the budget we're looking at now, goes up to 2, goes up to 3.2. So we've got the operational revenue and the operational expenses. We fall a bit short in 28. We go a bit higher in 29, but it balances out. I show you how the operating budget stabilization fund flows. And then on the right-hand side, I have a comparison of here's what the level service operating budget would have been, and here's what this operating budget is. So if we're going for level service, the budget would be 159.4 million. We're only getting 157 million. So short by 1.8 million and 3.8 million. Does that match the previous? Does that match the previous slide? I sure hope so. Nope, sorry, unrelated previous slide. Sorry for jumping around. I will say, is Mr. Milano on the call? Okay, I will tell you, I checked with Mr. Milano earlier today, asked him what he agreed with, what he didn't agree with. He said that he thought that the operating budget stabilization fund policy was pretty much in line with what he was thinking. He said his forecasts were more optimistic than mine were, but he hadn't had the chance to put them side by side and figure out why they're different. So maybe there's some optimism here. Maybe I made a math mistake. Maybe he has better assumptions, but this is what I'm saying now. So then the question is, what size override would we need? So the way I'm viewing this is the blue line is what the level service operating budget would have been if we had gotten level service in FY28, FY29. The orange line is this proposed budget. It's lower than that. I'm saying, what are the goals for the operating override? One is bring services back to what they would have been. So we're short in FY28. We're more short in FY29. If we're going to pass an override in FY30, get back up to level service of what we have today. If we lay off 5 teachers, then we lay off 10 more teachers. Let's hire those 15 teachers back, for example. That's what I'm thinking the override should be. And consistent with what I think we've done with overrides in the past. I remember not this most recent override, but in previous ones, we would lay off an art teacher. We would close the library for the weekend, and then we would have an override, and the library's back open for the weekend, and the art teacher's back. So that's, if we go this route, this is what I think we would want to do. And I'm saying, let's fund the operating budget stabilization fund so we can provide level services for 5 more years. No more free cash going into it. Just the override, the dollar amount is going to be high enough that working with the operating budget stabilization fund is going to get us through for 5 years. Next slide. So what are we going to need? All right, this is before the override. I've got revenue and expenses. We're short by 9 million to 15 million to 21 million. So what number can we stick in 2030 that it can grow for 2.5% for 5 years? And those first few years, it'll put money into the operating budget stabilization fund. In those last few years, it'll take money out of the operating budget stabilization fund. Well, Here's my math. If the override is $14.5 million, it's a big number, I know. It grows a little bit every year. And you can see in year one, we're bringing in, we had a shortfall of $9 million. We have an override of 14.5. We take 5.5, we stick it in the bucket, the operating budget stabilization fund bucket. Second year, 12 to 14, we take $2 or $3 million, stick that in the bucket. Third year, the bucket doesn't really need to do much one way or the other. Fourth year, money comes out of the bucket. Fifth year, money comes out of the bucket to provide for our needs. At that point, we need another override. A couple thoughts about this. One is that we're not taking any free cash and putting in the operating budget stabilization fund. We could. I did
Jay,
some math.
can I ask a quick question?
Please do,
I'm
please
sorry.
do.
How much is the override going to be in, what is it, FY 30? Or 14.5, right? Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm sorry. There it is.
So I had a couple thoughts about should we be taking free cash and putting it in here, and we could. One thought is if we don't, then we've got that free cash for other things like, other one-time expenses like road construction. I think there's no lack of money we could spend on roads in this town. Another thought is that, well, also I did the math, and you won't be surprised to hear if we take $1 million in free cash and stick it into here every year, then the override has to be $1 million less. The math worked. I did the math, but yeah, that's what it works out to be. If we think we're going to have $1 million in free cash every year to put to this, the override can be $1 million, yes, less. But let's start with this. I want to look at some options. What if we have an override that not to get us through 4 years, but to get us through, not to get us through 5 years, but through 4 years? Well, then instead of the override being $14.5 million, it can be $13 million. Leads to a lot of questions. Is it reasonable to have an override 4 years after the last one? Is the size of override reasonable? What are other towns doing? I think there's a lot of work that can go into that. I didn't do it. One might say, is that our job or is that the select board's job? We're a non-political group. I don't know the answer to that, but that's what I have so far. So what I have in the appendix is sort of repeating those last few slides for what if I have an override in 2029, but I do put $1 million in every, this year, next year, 28, 29. Doesn't move the needle that much. Also, I have the math backing up. What if we have an override in 2028? I decided not to repeat those slides again, but I can cut to the chase. If the override is in 2028, then we get to fund everything at level service, no cutbacks. And we use up the operating budget stabilization fund. I think we even have a little bit left. And then the override, if we want the override to last 5 years, 2028, 2 years from now, it'd be $11.5 million. If we want it to last for 4 years, it'd be $9.5 million. So coming back to the slide we looked at earlier, from the same place, we can plan for an override in 2030. I don't think that's a good plan. We can plan for an override in 2029, in which case we'd have a couple of lean years. We might be able to pull some rabbits out of hats with the budget, or we might not. Or we can plan for an override in 2028, in which case we'll fund everything. I'm not trying to put my finger on the scale, although one question I have for the warrant committee is, should we be putting our fingers on the scales? Should we be recommending something? Or do we just give the facts? I will then say, and this is one thing Brian said, what Brian said earlier got me thinking about this. The only thing I can promise you in my forecast is they won't come true. They're going to be off. They could be off in a positive direction, could be off in a negative direction. I tried to split it down the middle, but who knows? Positive and negative, I got health insurance on both of those. We could have unpleasant surprise on health insurance. We could have a pleasant surprise. We've had pretty reasonable health insurance inflation for the previous 5 or more years. It could be a lot less than 8%. Could be more than 8%, certainly in the short term. State aid. Back in those first slides that I sort of waved my hands and said, the warrant committee doesn't need these. I'm going to talk to town meeting about state aid and how it's been lacking. There are groups lobbying for more state aid pretty hard. So that could increase or it could decrease. Especially the next line is there could be a recession. A recession, what we've seen in the past is a recession leads to a decrease in state aid. Would probably also lead to a decrease in things like our restaurant revenue, maybe our business and taxes. I don't know. But the number one place that would hit us is state aid if there's a recession. I put these two on the same column. For positive changes, we could have additional free cash. I'm sort of assuming beyond this year that we're looking at, FY27, I'm assuming no free cash that's going to be put right to the budget, no free cash that's going to be put to the operating budget stabilization fund. There might be some. There often is. A negative for free cash is snow and ice deficits. We have that this year. So if we're counting on free cash, if we're saying, I expect to have $1 million in free cash to put in the operating budget stabilization fund, snow and ice deficits is one of many things that could come back to bite us if that's our plan. New growth, I assume $1 million of new growth every year. If these new 40Bs that are being built, I'm not an expert on how they're valued, but if when they go on the market, if their valuation goes up, that might put more money in our pocket. Or the other way to look at it is these buildings are being built. Once they're built, once they're done, are we going to have so much growth and new growth? And the last one, as many of you know, I was an employee benefits actuary for 15 years. This takes me back to what Brian was saying a few minutes ago. I agree with Brian. I think this is one thing that's been vexing me is when forecasting pay increases, it seems like what certainly the school administration does is they look at current employees and they say these current employees are going to grow with the union negotiated pay. Well, over the long term and maybe even the medium term, we should be having higher paid employees leaving and lower paid employees coming in. They've taken a close look at that for this coming year. They know who's, to the extent that they know who's leaving this year, they've made assumptions for that. The school administration tells me that doesn't move the needle much. I have to think that in the medium term, it will. And that if we have, let's say, just throwing out numbers, if the school contracts have a cost of living increase of 2.5%, but if everybody for having one more year of experience gets another 2%, well, sure, each individual is going up by 2%. But when you have the older employees leaving and the younger employees coming in, that should, over the medium term, get you back down to that 2.5% COLA. Just because I say that should happen doesn't mean that's what we've seen, doesn't mean that's what the experts think is going to happen. So that's a big caveat for where things might be better than what we're looking at. But so keeping on, only got a couple more slides before we hit the appendix. Things we have to decide about an override. Who is we? Is we the town? The town meeting? Is we the warrant committee? Is we the select board? We want an override to last for 4 or 5 years. We saw that's a pretty tangible result. It makes an override easier to swallow by a couple $1 million. Do we want any more than level of service? Everything I've been talking about here is level of service. Level service, level service, level service. The town can benefit from additional spending. People on the warrant committee know. Police, fire, library, council on aging. Obviously, the schools, they could all put more funding to very good use. The library could put an additional employee to very good use. So could police, so could fire, so could the schools. Do we want to talk about something other than level service? That's sort of beyond the scope of what we're looking at today, but something we need to think about when we have an override. Yeah, it's something we should think about before we start planning next year's budget. So my final arm twisting of the select board. I'm saying this today out to the ether. I'll presumably say something similar to town meeting when we have 2 new members on the select board. I think the select board, I would like to ask, I'd like the warrant committee to ask the select board to do a couple things. I'd like them to adopt proposed operating budget stabilization policy. If you don't like mine, something similar by July 1st. Again, Mr. Milano and I seem to be of similar mind on this policy. Some people on the town budget committee might have slight differences, but they're pretty minor. I think we can get a policy together. Now that still leaves up on the question of when is a target date for the next override. I understand we're about to have 2 new members of the select board. I understand saying we want an override 2, 3, 4 years from now is not an easy thing to say, but we need a plan. We need a plan before we start putting together next year's budget. I would like the warrant committee to request the select board to make a decision. I'm saying September 1st. If it's October 1st, don't tell anybody I said this. It's not the end of the world, but we need a target. And my college roommate was a big fan of Rush, so I've honored him by choosing Rush to say, if you're wondering about when should an override be, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. It's not good enough to say we don't know when the override is going to be needed. I've shared a lot. When it comes out of my mouth, it makes less sense than when I put it down on the PowerPoint. I've got some work to do over the next 3 weeks. My question for you is, I've laid out the questions for you. First of all, what do you think of the forecasts? Are they way off? Are they okay? My big question for you is, are you okay with me saying something like this in your name? And how should I change it? So it's open to the floor.
Can I weigh in?
Please do.
Can I share my screen?
Please do.
I did this for the budget committee, and it's pretty similar. So let me try to find it. Because this never comes out right. I can send this around to everybody afterwards. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
So this is I got all this data from DESE, which compiles all the data.
Department of Elementary Secondary Education.
Right, and they only have it updated through 2024, so they don't have the last 2 years information in there. Well, they wouldn't have this year, but they're behind. I don't know when they do it. And this is the growth in school expenses over the last 15 years.
Okay.
And what you can see is that post-COVID, there was a big jump with everybody. Like the average was more like in the, 3 to 4% range in Massachusetts. And but it was high, but it really jumped for everybody post-COVID. And the reason for that was there was inflationary issues, and there was also opera money, which schools use to hire people, this and that, and it increased their expenses. And if you looked at pre-COVID, post-COVID, the CAGR, the compounded annual growth rate, is for Milton pre-COVID was like 4.2%. Post-COVID, it's 7.1%. The state of Massachusetts was 2.8, 6.3. Our peer group, which is a group of towns that DESE says is similar to us, socioeconomic, et cetera, it was 3.4 before COVID and 4.9. So, well, that's one thing. So I'll leave that. So, like, I think the point is from this, these are real numbers, is that if things get back to normal, and this is going to be a high inflation year, and I think that's a problem for everybody in the schools and the towns. I don't, minimize that, and I understand it. But if inflation ever gets normal again, then, would we be getting back to the 3 to 4% increases? Average teacher salaries.
Can you make that a little larger, please?
Yeah. Sorry. Can you see that now?
I mean, a little larger would be great. Thank you.
How's that? Okay.
Yeah.
My dog's about to bark. She's calling somebody. So over the last 10 years, this is Milton. The average salary in Milton has increased 2.5% over 10 years, which is interesting. But it was mostly the increases in rate of pay has been over the last 5 years. The average before that was like 1%, which is low. And I do think that Milton was trending lower on school costs. Milton was trending lower on average school costs. And they spent money, I think, to get back up to competitive rates, which makes sense. But, and I'm going to give you what Massachusetts is. This is the Massachusetts average, which I'll get to increase that size too. And they basically have been like in the state, this is the entire state. Their increases over the last 10 years has been 3%.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and to me, in this, the last 3 years, it's 3.2, 3.5, 3.6, which I get. And I think that's a COVID factor probably. But my question is, I can stop sharing this because that's really...
No, please keep sharing it. Because I want to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about it.
So my thought on this is like baking in if you say it's going to be 5%, like you're going to guarantee an override for sure sooner than you need to. So if it was less, if we could try to keep it less in something that's more, you know, normal to cost of living increases or inflation rate, then shouldn't we be, you know, somewhere between 3 and 4% in what the schools should increase, less than 5, which should also put off an override for a while and try to keep us close to the 2.5% that we're supposed to increase expenses, Proposition 2.5 asked for.
Yeah, I've got a number of thoughts. One of them is, you know, I'm trying to forecast what things will be, not what I want them to be. So, but I guess getting back to so when it gets back to what I was talking about, like older, higher paid teachers retire, you hire younger, lower paid teachers. So to me, what I'm imagining is, so all these are union contract run, statewide, Milton, all of it. So if you could go back to the state, what you're looking at just a second ago.
Yeah, the state one. This is the state.
Yeah. So to me, what I think is statewide, we've got thousands of teachers. You've got the law of large numbers. You've got statewide an average number of teachers turning 65, an average number of teachers retiring, an average number of young lower paid teachers coming in. So you got that big group and you're going to have averages. You're going to have, it's going up by the, you know, okay, not every town has the same union contract. But let's assume they're all similar. Then you've got pay going up by the cost of living, because again, the law of large numbers, you've got an average number of old, paid people leaving, young, low paid people coming in. So if you switch back to Milton, so I don't know how the teachers union contract changed from 2014 to 2024. I'm going to start with the assumption that it didn't change radically. Maybe I'm wrong, but let's start with that assumption. Then what that tells me is that between 2014 and 2019, it wasn't that the union contract was less generous. I'm assuming it was, we had a lot of high paid old teachers retire and we had a lot of low paid young teachers start.
Agree.
And then from 2020 to 2024, it was the opposite. We had a stable population that's growing and getting not only the cost of living increase, but the increase for their longevity.
Right.
So then what does that tell? And I don't know the answer. I'm just sort of talking and thinking as I'm going. What does that tell me? Well, it tells me I don't know what my cohort is. Do I still, you know, we might have a cohort that, you know, the oldest teachers are 60 and they're all going to stay around for the next 5 years. If that's the case, costs are going to go up a lot. We might have a bunch of 65-year-olds that are about to retire. We might have somewhere in between. So I think in the long term, we'd be back to cost of living increase, but I don't know if we can say that in the medium term, nor do I know how we would figure that out.
Yeah, but it's really cost of living, but shouldn't it be based on negotiation? Like what has it been? Like maybe 2.5 seems low, but maybe it should be 3%. You know, like what's the long term? I mean, it's going to even out. As you can see from this, just from 2022 to 2024, there was a swing of, you know, 2.7%.
Yeah.
And, you know, people hung. Maybe they had a better, well, it was 3-year contracts. So maybe they did have a decent contract in 2022 and they got up to competitive rates. But is that going to keep happening? You know?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, my assumption is that the contract didn't change radically, but I don't know. I haven't asked. No, I don't see anyone on this call who can address that. So my assumption is that contract didn't change. Yeah. What can I say? It's maybe you're right. Maybe the
I
contract
don't
did
know.
get more generous, or maybe it just is demographic changes. So I don't know where I'm ending up because I do agree with you that, one fear I have is that we're not prepared for what's coming for us and we're going to have a big shortfall in the town. But another fear I have is that I'm going to cry wolf and I'm going to say, look at how horrible this is. And, instead of the schools going up by 5%, the schools needs only go up by 4%. And we'd have to, watch them. If their needs actually go up by 4% and they still say they want 5%, we've got to make sure, are you adding people? Are you adding services? What are you doing? But let's say, truly level service at schools only go up by 4%. Then I've cried wolf. I've told the town we need to do this. We need, 4-alarm fire. We need an override in 2 years. And I look like an idiot. Not that me look like an idiot is the big problem here, but
I
Well,
think
I
that's
agree
the
with you.
problem. I think that's the conundrum, right? I'm inclined to agree with you that we need a plan, and that you need to start to socialize with everybody in town meeting and with the broader citizens that we're going to need an override at some point in time, and that override, that point in time, is coming, sooner rather than later. And I think you do an awesome job of laying out the rationale and the facts and the reasons for why, and that, potentially there are the other overrides as well. So, it might not just be the one and done, and, that it's a series of things. I think the challenge to that is kind of some of the stuff that we've been talking about over the last few minutes, is that if you take this conservative approach in the forecasts and in the trying to set a plan for going forward to try to be thoughtful about this, but also try to be conservative, the risk is that some of the different departments in town might not manage as conservatively as they could or they should. Where's the control in trying to make sure that they are trying to maximize the value of every dollar that they get, versus, oh well, it's budgeted out for the next couple of years at whatever that number is, that's above the 2.5 I can spend and be comfortable with that. And I think there's the trade-off in there, and how you kind of try to do that plan in a conservative way, which I think is thoughtful and prudent and appropriate and the right thing to do, versus then creating a false sense of security and maybe a false confidence that they can spend without fear for the future, is a dilemma. And you'd like to think everybody appreciates that it's a conservative approach, and you're trying to take that conservative approach, and we hope to do better than that to everyone's benefit, including the services that are rendered. But that might be the negative perception that might come with it, and the potential negative consequence that might go with that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through one thing I might say, this is a forecast, not a budget. We haven't budgeted for X%. We're
Right.
forecasting X%, but that's sort of splitting hairs. And I think we'd have to depend on, the town administrator on the town side and the school administration and school committee and us on the school side to see, first of all, are you adding people? Whether, whatever department, schools or any other department, either you're adding a person or you're not. That's easy to see. And then, let's say it's the library department and they say we want to spend an extra $100,000 on puppets this year. We would see, okay, what was your non-personnel expense last year, and okay, you really want it this year and you have good reason for it, and maybe we'll say yes, maybe we'll say no, but at least be aware that they're asking for something above level service.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the content that you've pulled together is really strong. I would maybe think about organizing it a little bit differently to make it easier for people to absorb and process. I might start with trying to make sure that the font is big as much as
Thank
possible,
you.
because anybody that's going to sit in the back of even the first half of the auditorium is probably going to be challenged to see some of the numbers and the details. And in some cases, maybe you can make the graph smaller because it stands out as pretty clear cut, and make the font on the text around the graph bigger. Or, maybe simplify some of the text. So that's just one thing. And then I was thinking, as you were going through this, I was thinking that there are kind of four main points that you're trying to make. And that trying to organize it and group it into topics and tell them up front that there are the four topics that you want to talk about, and then kind of break it up into those pieces so people can stay with you. I think on the one hand, you're trying to show and I think you should add the history of where we've been in the past for the school. You have that nice graph that shows the revenues and or the projected revenues and the projected expenses, and how that gap widens over time. I think you should show it going back as well, to show it's not a problem of today, it's been a problem of a long time. And that, it's not perfect. It does change from time to time. It goes up and it goes down based on some of those conditions that you talk about what could make it better or worse. But trying to level set people of what the history has been like, and then a little bit of what the projections are forward. I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is how the operating stabilization fund works and how it came to be last year, because I think we on the warrant committee got a crash. I know I did this year got a crash course in that creation. We've talked about before that it wasn't well publicized as part of the override last year. I think educating people that got created last year, why, how it's worked, how it's been spent, I think would be time well spent in a couple of minutes. And then the third thing would be to try to make the case for why the challenges are in the future, and that we're going to need an override in the future. And however that's going to come to pass, you're starting to lay the groundwork that that's going to be something that we're going to need, and that is probably closer at hand than further at hand. And then the fourth thing would be, how the operating stabilization fund, what that might get funded at in the new override, and how that might protect us into the future, I think would be helpful also. And maybe you can combine the two operating stabilization fund concepts together, but I think breaking them apart into what's already been passed and approved and how it's been used, and why we think it needs to be in the future, along with then the plea for the select board to create a policy so that it can be spent and budgeted for in a wise manner, I think is and would be a good way to fit into that last part. So that was my soapbox for today. I'm sorry.
Oh, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
But the content's awesome. Like, you laid
Thank
it
you.
out clearly. I think I just think if you organize it just a little bit differently, it'll be easier for the audience to kind of stay with you.
Yeah, I put these slides together sort of over the weekend, and as I was giving them just now, I was like, they're not flowing as well as I thought they did. And I sort of have two audiences. I have you, the warrant committee, who already knows half of this, and then my other audience is town meeting, who I'm gonna assume knows none of it, and that's hard to. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback, and again, we've got 3 weeks to town meeting. I might be tapping you and anyone on this call to help with this presentation.
Do you have to keep it under 10 minutes, Jay? Or is that
No.
just, no, you have as much time as you need?
Yes.
Okay.
And this doesn't even cover what the warrant committee chairs of yore would say about the budget. They'd give like other big, pie graphs of here's how much goes to public safety and here's how much goes to schools and stuff like that. I hadn't thought about how much I'm going to, in addition to this, just sort of here's an overview of the budget. Maybe not a whole lot.
Well, I do wonder whether it would be more impactful, kind of to Larry's point, to try to maybe have a short version for town meeting. And I know when they had done the MBTA communities vote a couple of years ago, there was a lot of like webinars and seminars, and maybe they were webcasts or a lot. I don't know how they did it in advance, so people could get a lot of the details. And the moderator had really pushed that out in advance. Like, there's a really good comprehensive summary of all the issues here, at the town meeting. It's really going to be a higher level version of this. And then, you have all the other slides at town meeting. If there are questions or discussion, you can refer to those. But I think it might be more impactful if you can keep the town meeting part a little bit more focused, and then expect that people do a little homework in advance. Because people get awfully squirmy at town meeting.
Yeah, no, I like that. Ron, I see your hand up, but yeah, that's one thing I wanted to ask this group is, should we have a dedicated public meeting? All our meetings are public, but let's call it more public meeting dedicated to this either before or after town meeting. Uh, Either before or after town meeting, dedicated to this, inviting in the public, inviting in questions. Um,
I
should
think
we
it's
have
a
a
good,
special meeting? One option is town meeting starts on Wednesday. We could have a meeting that Monday. We might take care of any warrant committee business that's needed for town meeting and have this. It's maybe like in the keys room of the library. I have a theory that where you hold it communicates to the public who you expect to show up. If we hold it in the keys room of the library, we're saying we expect more people to show up. Please do. Um, and then, go into this in detail, a lot of back and forth with the audience. I think I like that idea. I don't know what other people think.
I don't know, Jay. I mean, the sort of people that would show up are probably the same sort of people that are either town meeting members already or would watch town meeting, I would
I
think.
fully
But
expect it to be town meeting members showing up, but again, they'll get a little more detail and they'll get to ask some back and forth.
yeah, all right. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good idea, I think. Yeah. And then you can keep it a little shorter at town meeting since you've already covered it.
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
more I think about it, the more I like that.
yeah.
I
Ron,
wonder
your
if,
hand is up.
sorry,
Oh, no, Nick, were you going to continue on the same
I was just
thing?
thinking that like maybe the election is Tuesday, and
Mhm.
then you said the first town meeting is the Monday,
No, town meeting starts on Wednesday. It's 2 days
Wednesday,
later than
and
it
so then
usually
the
is.
election is the prior, so it's 8 days before.
Yeah.
I wonder whether you're better off to try to have that session earlier after the election so that people can try to get more time to either attend live and in person or listen to or watch the recording.
So I was thinking the Monday that would be 2 days before town meeting and 6 days after the election. You're thinking maybe even earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just so that you get a chance for more people to watch the recording,
I
assuming
like
that
that.
you're going to get more people there that way than you might. And, you need the town moderator to really promote the value of it.
I like that. Yeah, I know there'd be some competition and that the select board and the planning board and the school committee might have to hold their organization meetings, but we can conflict with that. I don't think that's a big deal. Um, so it could be as soon as that Wednesday, the day after the meeting, that Wednesday or Thursday. Yeah, I like that. Ron, you put your hand down. Did I wear you out?
No, I had a comment. I agree with Nick. I would keep the concepts simple, straightforward, and brief at town meeting because unless we're asking them to decide something, just hitting them with all this information is very difficult in such a
Yeah,
big setting because I don't know what we're asking them. I think we're just telling them we need to do something, someone needs to do something.
that's a good
Right?
point.
We're not voting. I would be careful about I don't know what to present, right? It's kind of like this is just putting on people's radar.
It's a very
So
good point.
I would agree with Nick to keep it simple. The other thought I had is this budget committee that Brian had mentioned. It sounds like maybe that committee should have a voice in this discussion. I would like to see what that group proposes, and I would think if that group consists of key leaders across different organizations in this town, those are the voices I want to hear. I don't know if I have an opinion on this because I don't know what to think about. I do agree we need to decide something. I just don't know what to decide. But if we have members of the select board, school committee, these other committees that have large portions of the budget, I would like to hear when they think, we would be looking to do an override, what would be proposed, and maybe it's something that's a variable, right? Maybe when we hit to a certain threshold, then we would need to trigger an override. Maybe that's not like, a set in stone. It has to be the 2029. It could be, once we get to 13% above budget or something like that. I don't know,
Hmm.
but I would like to hear their thoughts, and maybe it's they come to the warrant committee. I just worry that if we have a public hearing, no one's going to show up, and it'll be the 13 of us staring at each other, and it'll be like this. But
It's
at least if you rope
possible.
in that budget committee, then you have some folks who have some responsibility who have to show up and have an opinion. Just my thought.
Yeah, that's possible. As far as the budget committee, like I sort of implied earlier, it's been hard to get people to make a decision. Um, as far as like, what do we decide for the override? I mean, one thing is, really what we're deciding is the date that the operating budget stabilization fund goes to zero. Now, if that goes to zero and we've had a great few years and we can make it one more year, that's okay. But what it certainly, as a mostly outsider, what I've observed over the past 10 years or so is every year the select board looks at things and says, how are we doing? Should we have an override or not? I think we can scrape it together to get one more year. And I would just, or, okay, we're gonna have an override. You got 3 months to get ready for it. I
Right.
I'd rather set a date for an override now, even if it's not even if it's not needed. Of course, I don't want to cry wolf, but
I think at minimum, I would love to have Nick Milano in that discussion. One thing I've noticed being on this warrant committee for a couple years now is at the beginning of the year, we're way over and the house is on fire, all kinds of problems. And at the end of the cycle, somehow Nick finds an extra 5 million bucks. I don't know where he finds it.
yeah,
And I do worry that it's a big cry wolf situation where we constantly kind of, we're like level service, but level service is going to put us way over on the budget. And somehow Nick finds a way to work it out. But sometimes he doesn't, like last year. So
and I think that's there's again, it's sort of the difference between a forecast and a budget. Like I'm forecasting, let's say we're talking about property and casualty insurance. I'm looking at it and saying, on average, property and casualty insurance goes up by 2.5%. So that's what's in my forecast. Nick will look at it and say, in some years it goes up by 8%. So he'll prepare for it to go up by 8%. And then when it doesn't, okay, that's either flows to free cash if that already
right.
happened, or if he's setting the budget, then he'll say, oh, we get some room in the budget. So I understand why they set a conservative budget and then sort of ratchet things down between the month of January and the month of March. I understand why he does that. And I tried to not do that here. Also, all sorts of assumptions that I didn't necessarily lay out, but like, what's our local receipts going to be? Nick makes a conservative assumption where as I looked at the last few years and said, here's the average. Maybe I'll be high, maybe I'll be low. The way I'm seeing this forecast is if we lay out this forecast in detail, then we can say a year from now, here was the forecast. Nope, local receipts came in 2% lower than we thought it would be. Okay, that's fine. We thought it would be this. It is now this. We know why there's a difference. As opposed to setting a budget where you're like, if you make an incorrect assumption on local receipts, you're not be able to pay the electric bill. So they're sort of two different things.
Understood.
That was a lot of rambling to say, I understand why fortunate things pop up. But
Yep, understood.
so we've talked a lot. There are some questions about the assumptions raised by Brian, which I certainly sympathize with. I think we can dig into that a bit. Other concerns about what we're presenting, like big question. It sounds like nobody's objecting to, in general, presenting this. Do we recommend or do we just share? Do we recommend, I don't know, for example, a 2028 override, or do we just say, if you want a 2028 override, here's what you got. If you want a 2029 override, here's what you got.
I think the message that there's an override coming is probably strong enough, and then you can leave it to the work with the other committees to decide exactly when, to plan for that override. But
Mhm.
just presenting the information seems like good enough to me. Without,
Okay.
unless you're gonna, consult with all the committees ahead of time, the finance committee and the budget committee and the select board and everything
Yeah, I
else.
think practically speaking, that's not realistic. I mean, I'll talk to Mr. Milano. I'll, I mean, again, 2 out of the 5 select board members are going to be new in a few weeks. Uh,
I think I kind of agree with Larry. I don't think you should make a recommendation. I think you can say because it's just, and I think you can frame it and say it's the select board's job to make a recommendation about an override. But as we look at things, it seems like an override is going to be needed in the 28, 29, 30 range. And the consequences of, as we look at a forecast at this point in time of those different timelines are, X, Y, and Z as you laid out in some of the slides. And um, hopefully the forecasts turn out to be better than the conservative estimates that are provided, that might push that out in the future, but that the trying to lay the groundwork for the likely necessity and rationale for it and building that case over time so that it does have more, because transparency builds trust, and trust will build confidence in when and if it needs to happen at some point in time, I think is the right thing to do. And you're starting to build that case. And if nobody listens and picks up on the different factors over time, then I think you have other means to try to scream louder. But I think trying to walk quietly and lay the facts is a good way to kind of continue to build trust that I think you've done such a great job of restoring with town meeting over the last, couple of meetings.
I appreciate you saying that. One place where we might be at an impasse is the school inflation assumptions. I will share a slide that I shared with y'all a few months ago, which is sort of apples to oranges with what Brian was showing, but it's just another data point. It's a handful of communities, which may or may not be our peers. And Brian was looking at average teacher salary. I'm looking at per pupil expenditure increase. Sort of apples to oranges, but sort of in the same ballpark. The per pupil spending for these 30 different towns, pre-COVID and post-COVID, 2018 to 2023, went up by 5.5%. So I don't know where that leaves us. I have a lot of sympathy
But
with what Brian is
that's
saying,
not an
but
average of all the towns. Those are just certain towns. It's
correct. There's
not
certain
like,
towns. Correct.
yeah, I mean,
But
there's 395 towns in Massachusetts, and some of them were lower than that. Well, some of
right,
them were lower than that.
but they're, should we be comparing ourselves to towns in Western Mass? Maybe
I mean,
not.
Desi has towns that they think socioeconomic that we should compare ourselves to.
Yeah,
And
I did see that list. Yeah.
and Wellesley was higher than us in their increases annually. They were the number 1, and we were number 2 in our annual increases. But we were 2 percentage points over the average. And I just think that's one thing that bothers me is I never hear, I said this at the last budget meeting we had, like nobody ever talks about cost cutting. Nobody ever talks about being productive or saving money. And I think they should. And I think that people should be looking at why, like not everyone's, like everybody in the warrant committee, I don't work anymore, so I don't know, but I doubt everybody's gets an automatic 5% increase every year in pay, you know? I mean, I suspect that nobody does. And I think people at the town meeting might rankle at that a little bit, you know?
Well,
Because they have to pay property taxes, you know?
yeah, a couple thoughts. I mean, the pay is mandated by contracts, and yeah, those contracts are negotiated every 3 years. But that's driven by
negotiated.
contracts.
Yeah.
And as far as nobody talks about cost cutting, I would disagree with that because I mean, you looked at the schools heard, you're getting a big cut. Now in January it was going to be a super big cut, then it went down to $1 million cut. So they got $1 million less than they wanted. And as we all know, they were putting $1 million into the circuit breaker. So then they had to decide, okay, we're going to put less into circuit breaker, but we're also going to cut costs. And I would say you can look at their, especially their school budget committee meeting, they met every week. And if you look at those from, starting 2 weeks ago to the previous 6 weeks, they were talking about cost cutting pretty hard. They obviously laid off people. They increased bus fees. They increased activity fees. They, I can't list other thing they did, but they certainly did talk about
Most of the
cost cutting.
positions that they cut, most of the positions they cut didn't even exist. They were just budgeted for and weren't filled. I don't know
When you
that
say
they laid
most,
people off. They might have.
some, maybe like 3 out of
They
7 or
thought
8.
some of the people they didn't replace people that left, is right.
I don't
Well,
know about most.
yeah, and they raised fees, and they did raise some fees. And maybe they should raise them. I thought some of them they should have raised more, but that's an aside.
But I don't
Right.
think this is the issue today. Like I think the the schools are the biggest budget in the town, so it's an important consideration. But regardless of whether you look at these numbers or even the numbers Brian had pulled up with the DESI stuff before, like costs are going to go up in an average way more than the 2.5% of property taxes. And so, and if you combine that with the other parts of the town expenditures, like there is a challenge there. There's a fundamental challenge that we have to account for. And you want to hope that everybody involved in all the different departments is going to be as thoughtful and prudent as they possibly can be to keep those costs rising at the slowest rate possible. But they're going to go up. And, the hope would be that this period of 2018 to 2023, which is, got a really steep inflation in 2022 and all the COVID expenses that went with it, that this isn't the normalized rate of change. But even if you go back with those other numbers, they're above the 2.5%. We have that mismatch. We have to figure out, and I think that's the most important thing. The
Agreed.
details are not the discussion that should be the focus of this part of the conversation at town meeting, in my mind.
Yeah, I guess why I wanted to bring up the subject again is because if I'm going to be presenting things in your name and I'm saying these are the assumptions, are you okay with that? I think we've heard Brian is not, I don't want to speak for you, Brian, but you have questions about it. I think I would come back to saying and when I say we, I mean the town budget committee, which me and Brian are on, we got a detailed spreadsheet forecasting the costs from the schools, which I forwarded to all of you yesterday. And that was level service. That was same number of people. So if I were to argue for some other amount other than what the schools gave us for their forecast, I would have a hard time arguing that. I think my best argument might be they're assuming nobody retires, and what I talked about, old, high paid people leaving, lower paid people coming in. I think that's a good argument. But I think that's maybe my only argument. And I'd have a hard time forecasting anything other than what the school administration gave us as a forecast. Because they didn't just scribble down some numbers on a piece of paper. They gave us some backup for it. I don't love just saying, sorry, Brian, I hear your concerns, but I'm the chair, so too bad. That's not something I like doing. But eventually we're going to have to make a decision about what assumptions to have in there. And I'm still at the point where I'd have a hard time doing anything other than what the administration gave us.
Well, the data I showed you was accurate data. It was real data from DESI. It wasn't projections. It was real data. And, I'll go back. I mean, how many people get a 5% increase a year? Is that a normal for every job? Like, that seems high. Maybe I'm wrong, but I was in corporate up until 2 years ago for 40 years. And unless you were changing positions, it was normally like a 3%, I think was an average, depending on the year and everything else. But
I mean, there's two different
It's-
questions. Are they actually getting that? And the answer is yes, because that's what their contract says. And now then there's the question of either they be getting that, or long-term trends like I talked about, employee turnover. Is that going to bring it down to give us numbers closer to what you saw? Well, maybe. But are the employees actually getting 5% a year? Yes, it's in their contract.
okay, they haven't yet. I mean, that's not been an average, but okay, maybe future. But that's a negotiated amount then. And controllable.
I mean, actually, if you look at, I know I sent you a bunch of things yesterday. One of them is called MPS budget projections, and you can look how they roll forward the next few years. And they do have, an increase due to cost of living and steps. They do have a decrease due to attrition. Maybe that decrease is way too small. They've got a number there. Maybe we could talk to them and see should that decrease due to retirements be higher?
Yeah, they were trying to figure it out. I know that they were digging into it. But
yeah.
But it's a tricky thing, right? Because you really kind of, I mean, aside from the cost aspect, it's teachers with longevity and experience that contribute to the culture of a program and the consistency of the quality of the education. So, you want to create an environment where you're retaining those teachers. It's assuming they're good teachers, which is why they've been there a while. That's going to create a stronger system. So it's a bit of a challenge that way. And hopefully there's a natural cycle to the whole thing, and they have the analysis of where they fit on that natural cycle. But I would think they want to retain their staff to the best of their ability. There's a reason that they're there.
Okay. I appreciate the conversation. I don't know where else we can go tonight. As I said, I'd appreciate, any one of you who wants to give me feedback, work with me on making this presentation smoother. I'm going to certainly watch this recording over, take your comments. I'd appreciate help making this smoother. I think I'm going to plan for a publicized meeting after the election before town meeting. I think I like that idea. It sounds like other people do. Do we need to have a meeting between now and then? What I'm thinking is working backward from town meeting. Town meeting starts on a Wednesday. I think we should plan for a meeting, maybe a Zoom only meeting that Monday to say, are there any last minute changes we need to address? And then a few days before that, we'd have our very public meeting where we're sharing information like this. Do we need to meet any other times between now and then? I don't know that we do.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, not unless there's any major changes to the warrant, but
Yeah, like I know there's going to be a small change to the Blue Hills Technical School bill. Now, that's something we can tackle a couple days before town meeting. Just make an amendment. Yeah. So, okay. I appreciate your patience and your feedback today. Please send me feedback. You know how to reach me. And I'll, as this goes through better and better iterations, I'll share this with the team.
Thank you for putting it together.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks
a
very
lot.
much.
Yeah,
It's really
thank
good
you, Jay.
information.
Mhm.
Okay. Good night.
Okay. All right.